In this video we're going to talk about project methodology. In other words, we're going to talk about how projects are set up, how they come into existence, how they are planned and then implemented, and review processes that the projects go through at the various stages. So by methodology it means simply the method by which projects are set up. So we're going to look at project methodology systems approach. Now, a project methodology systems approach refers to the implementation of a project. The idea is to bring a project into existence and to implement it, to devise a project, to think of a project. The project could be a new way of producing a product, or even think about a new product itself and introducing a new product to the market. Whatever the project is, it's thinking about the project and then thinking about what is required in order to deliver that project, to make the project, in a sense, make it real, to make it happen. Project managers must understand the project methodology in order to manage the process effectively. It's essential that project managers understand all of the requirements of the project. What's the project meant to achieve? What are the different components of the project? What are the different levels? What's the complexity of the project? Who will be involved? What resources are required? The project manager must have a good understanding of what's required in the project for them to be effective managers, to be effective project managers. The aim of a project manager is to devise a project methodology that encompasses and interlinks all the elements of a project. So the project manager must have a good overview of what's required. What is the project? What's the project meant to achieve? And then look at all of the components of the project, all of the linkages within the project. Look at the personnel and the capital required and the space within the company, and look at all of the issues associated and try to formulate it into some sort of picture that will make it clear, and there will be clear understanding within the organization what's required, and that will enable the organization to deliver the project, to succeed with the project. So let's start by saying, what is a system? Well, a system is the interlink of components and processes which are integrated together to produce or achieve a common goal or purpose. So we think of individual components, and the individual components themselves may have their own systems. They may be made up of subcomponents. But we think of, let's say, within a company, we might think of the production department. Now, the production department should really link with the marketing department, because the marketing department will indicate what's likely to be sold in the next month or the next 6 months. So there is an interlinkage between the two. And in fact, within the company, all of the various functional areas, the accounts, the marketing, the personnel, all of the various departments are in a sense linked. They're linked together. So a system can be seen as an interlinkage of components and processes that are integrated. They're integrated because they're trying to achieve some particular objective, and they're trying to produce this common goal or this purpose. They're trying to achieve the output that's required by the business. So that's our understanding of a system. As I said, it could be that individual departments may have subsystems. The production department, for example, may have a subsystem that is entirely given over to milling, the milling section. There are different milling machines, and there will be a milling section that could be seen as a subcomponent, a subsystem. And the milling section itself may be made up from different parts as well. There may be part of the milling section which deals with bigger components and one that deals with smaller components. So we can imagine the system being, let's say in our case, the company, made up from subsystems, different functional areas, and the functional areas could be again divided up into, if you like, subsystems. It depends on where we want to stop with this classification. In regards to projects, a systems approach is necessary to provide a holistic perspective where all project phases are integrated with effective feedback loops. So the idea of the system is it gives us this holistic perspective. It gives us the whole perspective. We can see the whole organization. We can see the whole issue, whatever it is we're dealing with. The system approaches, it gives us a full picture. It tells us all of the parts that are required. We can imagine it as being drawn out on a sheet of paper with flow diagrams and boxes and arrows and linkages, but we can see the whole system. It's a holistic approach. But it can also show which part of that system needs to work before the others. It could show the sequence by which, let's say, production takes place. Production takes place in one area and then it moves to the next area and it moves on to the next area. It's all within the same system, but it's not just showing what has to be done, but it's showing the phases, the sequences that these processes have to follow. And of course, there may be feedback loops. There may be loops where, let's say, a component comes off one section in the production division, comes off one section and goes to the next section and gets more work done, and then goes back to the first section again for some extra piece of work to be completed. So there may be feedback. There may be feedback as well in terms of communications, not just in terms of the physical output, but there could be feedback where consultations have to take place between a particular department and a different department, and then the feedback is what is the outcome of the negotiations or the discussions. And so the system shows exactly what's required, where it all fits, what are the linkages between one section and the next, what are the loopback, the feedback loops within that system. Now, the project life cycle of a system, well, a project methodology system is the integration of interlinkage or interlinked phases that function together to produce a set of deliverables in each phase. So the project methodology is about looking at the system as an integrated whole. It's all contained. Everything that's required is understood. The project manager may have to look at this whole structure and make sure that all the parts are logically fitted together, that the feedbacks are in place, and everything it's feasible, it can be done. And that's a major task for any project manager to undertake. And each part of the system may have a deliverable, may have an output. That output, once it's complete within that section, moves on to the next section, but that's what was promised and that's what was delivered. So each part of the system will have outputs. These outputs move to the next part of the system for additional work or refinement in some way, and until it finally becomes the final product that was promised. So the project management processes, well, we can imagine 4 of them. Just an initiation process, getting the whole thing started. The planning process. How will this product or process be planned and delivered? What's required? What resources are required? What personnel? What machinery? What all of the factors. What additional marketing personnel? What additional communications channels are required? Everything that's required to produce the output that's desired will have to be planned. So there's an initiation process, coming up with the idea. This is really overlaps with entrepreneurial thinking, coming up with this new product or this new process, then planning it, and then executing it, doing it. By the time we get to the execution phase, the plans should be robust. They should be well thought of, criticized, analyzed, discussed. They should be moved around between different departments and different perspectives taken on the various proposals. And finally, we have a closing phase, the phase where the output is coming off. The output has been achieved. And what we'll do in the rest of this video is to look at these four phases, these four processes. First of all, a project methodology plan. Well, identify all activities involved in the project and develop a project life cycle. How long will it take from thinking about a project to actually delivering the output? What is the life cycle? We know there's an initial phase, there's a planning phase, there's a production phase, and there's a winding up phase at the end where the product has come to the end. Following the project management process, that's to initiate, plan, execute and close, like we just talked about, break each phase down and complete mini projects. So it falls to the project manager to break down all of the tasks into smaller tasks so that they can be achieved, and then bring them all together to, in a sense, assemble them all together to produce the output that was planned initially. So the project management process is making sure that what's been promised can be delivered, and that may involve breaking up different processes into very small sections, getting those processed, and eventually assembling them all to meet the requirements. So the initiation phase, well, the initial starting point of a project is, or may be classified as, the initiation process. This stage identifies the need for a project. Presumably there must be a rationale for a project. Projects don't just happen. They must be planned, they must be thought about, there must be a cogent reason. There must be something which makes it vital that this activity will take place. It could be an opportunity, as I said, related to entrepreneurial thinking, an opportunity to further exploit a niche in the market, bringing a new product or a product related to existing products into existence. Or it could be a new process due to changes in technology, which will cut the cost of the product as it's currently constructed. So a new process will be introduced which will eventually replace existing processes and cut costs. But at the initial stage, the need for the project must be identified and must be made clear. The projects just don't happen. The initiation process is subdivided into the following activities. The following phases outline the key activities or documents required during the process. So we'll break up the initiation process because it's subdivided into the following activities. And these activities are the initiation process, the planning process, the execution process, and the closing process, as we spoke about earlier. And that really shows the project life cycle as a system. So it comes into existence, it's planned, it's executed, it's delivered, and then it's closed off. Now the initiation process, well, first of all, appoint a phase owner. Someone must be the champion of the initiation process. Someone must come forward to argue for the project. It's also perhaps a good idea to have someone arguing against it, so that all of the pros and cons are looked at critically and set out clearly for management to understand what's involved, what are the good points, what are the drawbacks, and then make a decision. But if it's decided that the project should go ahead, then there should be someone appointed to look after the project. So a phase owner should be appointed, a champion. The phase owner is the project sponsor or project manager. This person is responsible for allowing the project to go ahead. So the project manager or the project manager's role can now be seen. They are the ones who take over the ownership within the structure of the business, take over the ownership of this particular project. In other words, they're going to dedicate time and effort to delivering this particular project. They have to make a go or no-go decision. They have to decide, is it a good idea to do this or not to do it? And they will base this, of course, on all sorts of analysis and comments and feedbacks, and they will conduct perhaps a feasibility study. And depending on all of the outcomes from consultation with various departments and stakeholders, perhaps looking at customer requirements, looking at management, looking at the resources required, looking at all of those issues, they have to decide whether to recommend the project or not. Then they write a project charter. This is the overall plan of the project, including objectives and approach to achieving them. So if they decide to go ahead, they will write a project charter. And this project charter is the plan for the project. When the project should start, what's involved, what resources, how it can be fitted into the existing business, what resources are required, what training, what capital, and so on, and how it will be produced. Costings, looking at all of the essential business parts of a business plan, looking at the overheads and how the overheads will be absorbed, looking at the likely benefits of the project. So the charter will be the overall plan for the project. And then appoint a project manager. Now, I said earlier the phase owner is the project manager. Well, that may be a project manager at a very senior level who's looking at the project, who will go about making the decision to do it or not to do it, and also to write the charter if it gets that far. But if it does get that far, then perhaps a project manager from within that team may be appointed to implement the charter. So look at the formal document, the project charter, and appoint someone to make sure that the charter is followed, it's adhered to, and that its requirements will be followed. That's all within the initiation part. Of course, the charter will also set, as I said earlier, will set out the resources required. It's important that the project team and their requirements, as well as the resources of the business, the space within the business, the capital equipment, the training for personnel, the additional employees perhaps, all of these must be set out. And once they have been set out, and once they've been signed off or agreed to by management, then the project can start. Before they've been clearly set out and discussed and justified, they will not be signed off by management. So that needs to happen before the project will start. They also need to manage a startup meeting. So the project needs to be introduced to the key stakeholders and to the project team. Now, the key stakeholders within the organization may be management, it may be management from the functional areas, from production, marketing, distribution, or all the various interested departments. And they are, in a sense, stakeholders in the project, so it should be introduced to them. It's important that there is clear understanding throughout the organization of the perceived importance of this project. So manage the startup meeting. Now, the planning process. Well, the planning process provides a detailed overview of the project plan. So it's a detailed overview. And this really is into the second stage, as we'll see in a second again from the previous diagram. We'll see it again in a moment. The following phases outline the key activities, documents required during this process. So now we've moved from the initiation process to the planning process. So here it's necessary to identify phase objectives, looking at time, cost, the quality that's required, and looking at what's required as deliverables. What are the outputs from the various subsections, and how can they be slotted in to the existing requirements or demands that are placed on those subsections. So, for example, within a company that's producing something, they may be tooled up to produce the various components for that particular output, but now they're asked to retool or to dedicate some machines or some personnel to bringing on this extra project. So it's important to identify what's involved in this. It's important to develop build methods. The work breakdown structure is used to develop the deliverables and build method. So it's important to understand who's doing what, who's been allocated, where does this project reside, whose responsibility is it, and how will it be progressed, how will it be checked to ensure that it's been delivered according to the schedule that's been agreed. Develop an execution strategy. Look at the resources that are required to complete the project. Available resources can be in-house, for example. It could be that there is spare capacity within the business currently to take on this extra project. Or it could be that contractors and outsourcing may be required. But it's important to know where the resources are going to come from to enable this project to happen. Otherwise, it's just a good project, a good idea that's not going to happen. The resources must be identified for it to happen. So check resource availability. The availability of resources will influence the project's execution strategy and the schedule. If the resources are not available, or if there is high demand on the resources currently, so that this particular project may go to the back of the queue, then the project may not be a big success. So it's important to check resource availability and to make sure that management are aware of what resources are available for the project and the implications of shortages of resources in terms of timing and execution for the project. Develop project schedule. Well, develop a timeline to ensure all deliverables can be achieved. This involves all knowledge areas and trade-offs. So look at a timeline and try to see how the resources can be brought into play, perhaps using a Gantt chart or using some sort of visual aid to try and show where the resources are resident, how they can be tapped, where there are competing demands for the resources, what priority will the project have in terms of the pecking order from other projects. So try to look at a schedule that will enable the project to come into existence. Now the execution phase. Well, this phase is actually the plan taken effect. All necessary activities are carried out in order to bring the project to completion. So at the execution phase, it's ready to go. Everything has been checked, been analysed, issues have been confronted and dealt with, so it's ready to move at the execution phase. The following phases outline the key activities documents required during this process. So we're looking here at the execution process. Now, it's important to issue instructions. It's important that there is clarity about the requirements of the project. So it's important that documentation is developed that's clear, easily followed by operators and by departmental managers. They know exactly what's required. So the instructions are unambiguous. And then it's important to monitor and control the throughput of the resources as they're being converted into usable items for this particular project. So the project and team performance is monitored and all the activities are controlled to ensure deliverables will be achieved in the set timeline. So it's important that there is tight observation of what's happening. See who's involved, what are the issues. There may be, even at this stage, surprises within the organisation. Surprises in the sense that the project meets a problem that wasn't anticipated. It's to be hoped that everything had been anticipated, but such is the way the world is, something can just happen. And what contingencies are in place? How can these issues be dealt with? So, looking at the actual performance of the team, looking at timings, who does what, how long does it take them to do it, how does their role fit in overall? Is there a mistiming? Are the resources standing idle for some part of the time while other resources are worked heavily? Is there a way of balancing the way in which resources are used? So it's important to monitor and control. Manage scope changes. Scope changes are logged and assessed, and decisions are communicated. Look at the scope of the business to deliver the project. Look at the resources and how the resources are stretched because of the additional project. And look at ways in which balancing, as I said earlier in the monitoring control part, make sure that there is a balance between the requirements, the resource requirements across the whole project, so that it fits smoothly in with the other requirements from other projects, but also there is a continuity in production and, in a sense, a smoothness, and it's under control in terms of the deliverable. Manage build methods. Well, changes to the build method are managed and accessed. The original proposal will have technical requirements, perhaps, about how the product should be assembled or the components that are produced. When the project is implemented, variations may turn up, may be required. That the original plans, although they seemed good at the time, may require alteration. It may be that even the dimensions of some of them are just too much, too misaligned. They don't fit together smoothly. Or perhaps tolerances are too tight for particular production departments. So, looking at build methods, how should the project be brought together, and where there is mismatch from the practicality of doing it, that has been observed from the practicality of doing it, where there are those mismatches, how can they be dealt with? How can they be accommodated? And manage configuration. Operational changes are managed. So it's important that any operational changes are calmly dealt with. Operational changes could be changes in the use of technical equipment. It could be there has been changes because of changes in technology, and new processes or new products become available, which can be integrated into the product, which will improve its overall effectiveness and improve its desirability in the marketplace. But these must be dealt with in a controlled manner. There's no element of panic. They should be anticipated that this will happen, and when it happens, they're dealt with in a planned and calm manner. Issue a certificate of completion. The completion certificates are issued by project managers. That's when the project is complete, when it's done. It may be a one-off project, in which case it's signed off as completed. It was a one-off activity. Or it may be a recurring one that now becomes part of the production process of the business. And this is the way the business will in future produce particular products. So it depends. Sometimes it's a one-off, sometimes it's a recurring process. But the first run is very important. The first run will establish the documentation and the processes. It'll establish the instructions that are passed out, the resources that are required. It'll identify timings, it'll identify failings of the system, it'll identify issues with competition with other projects within the business and pressure for the use of technology and machinery and staff. So this is the feedback. This is the part where it all comes together, and then the management can make a decision because it's now been done. The full cycle has been followed. The closing phase, well, technically this is the part where the management will in fact decide about the project, whether it should continue or not. This is when the deliverables are measured and when the plan is gauged as successful or not, when the plan has been achieved or not. This is the handover and termination of the project. This is when the project ceases to be a new project. This is one where if it's a one-off, it's been achieved, it's done. But if it's one which now goes into the production schedules with the other projects of the business, then it's been tested, it's been tried, it just needs monitoring in future to ensure that its requirements are adhered to in the production stage. The following phases outline the key activities and documents required during the process. So in the closing phase, well, verify commissioning process. How the deliverables will be communicated, transferred, tested and commissioned. So the closing phase is when the output, the deliverables, will be communicated. This is when they're passed on. It's transferred from the development stage into the final stage. It goes now to the part that commissioned it. Who was it who came up with the idea? Who was it who required this? And it's passed over at this stage. Manage receivable process. Well, deliverables are received with all composing documents. So the outputs are received by the department that commissioned it, or by the customers who commissioned it, and now it's passed over and all of the documents are in a sense signed off. There is now knowledge about what is required with this project, how it should be done, how it should be completed, and the customer's reaction to the project should be sought and also documented so that improvements and refinements can be made to the documents in the event of the project being performed again in the future. Then there's the managed commissioning process. Well, inspection of the deliverables to confirm they have been completed as per the project plan. It's important at this stage to make sure that the items that are produced conform to the requirements of the initial request, that they are not at variance with the specifications and the requirements that were first set out when the project was initially proposed. So it should meet precisely the requirements of the customer or of that department as specified at the earliest stage. So the managed handover process, well, handing over the completed project to the right stakeholder or client. So at this stage it's just simply a question of handing over the project and getting it signed off and recording it as completed in the company ledgers. The official close of a project, or end of contractors, close all accounts, assets and team closure. So the official close is when everything is wrapped up, everything is completed and the project has now been completed. There will be a review phase that should be undertaken, which will be the overall review of the project right from start to finish, to see what issues, how they were dealt with, and this is a learning process. to ensure that anything that can be learned from the process is learned and documented, so that in the event of this project running again or something similar running in the future, then the issues that are identified during the review stage, during this final stage, they will help in resolving those issues before they arise. So that's the project management process: the initiation process, the planning process, execution, and closing process. And these are the various parts within those different stages, those 4 stages. This is mostly based on Burke, the project management planning and control techniques, which is published by Wiley. That's where most of these notes come from, and they're slightly modified for our purposes. That's all we're going to deal with in this video, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.